What's up, everyone? Welcome to the first episode of my podcast. My name is Peter O'Coffer. I also go by the name Exodus, and this is my first podcast. In this podcast, I will focus on building your personal brand and not your business brand. There's plenty of podcasts out there that focus on building a business brand for people who want to get into small business. This is not that podcast, but if you do listen to my podcast, obviously some of the skills are transferable over to starting a small business. So let me tell you a little about myself. Did my undergrad and got my master's in sociology from Purdue University. In the late 80s, I started doing music, did some things, didn't really go into the early 90s, didn't really go anywhere with it. In the mid 90s, I started writing fiction. So to sum that up, I have two science fiction fantasy novels and one novella that I have published, and it is on Amazon. And in January of 2022, I'm releasing my fourth album of music. My music is funk, R&B, soul, little rap, and some rock thrown in there. So that's a little bit about me. After college, I did some odd jobs like a lot of folks, worked in some retail, and got a job at the Indiana House of Representatives working for the House Caucus. So I've Democrat Caucus. So that's what I've been doing for a while now, 20 years almost. I also was an activist in college in the early to mid 90s. So that's my background. I bring all of that into my brand. So what is a personal brand? That's a little interesting, a little difficult, but I'm going to start with the definition offered in Wikipedia and just start from there. I don't totally agree with all of it, but let's start with there and then we can discuss it. Personal brand is the conscious and intentional effort to create and influence public perception of an individual by positioning them as an authority in their industry, elevating their credibility, and differentiating themselves from the competition to ultimately advance their career, increase their circle of influence, and have a larger impact. The process of personal branding involves finding your uniqueness, building a reputation on the things you want to be known for, and then allowing yourself to be known for them. Ultimately, the goal is to create something that conveys a message and that can be monetized. So there you have it. And again, I say some of this I agree with, some of this I don't. It's very business focused, and it's very focused for someone who wants to be a small business owner. But we all essentially have personal brands, and I like the second half of this more so because, it talks about your reputation and your uniqueness. And I think that's kind of what more I'm going to focus on in this podcast as I work my way through different things here. As I said earlier, we all have a brand. The question is your brand a strong brand or a not so strong brand? Because people have a perception of you, and you do have a reputation. And essentially that is the essence of your brand. It does mention in this definition about an intentional and conscious effort to create your brand. Well, I mean, as we get deeper into the podcast, I'm going to basically, focus on what you care about and what you're passionate about, and that will be your brand. A lot of people, when they hear personal branding, they think of contrived, kind of illusions or people faking it and building false narratives of who they are. And some do that, but that's really not good branding. That's not branding that will last. People are going to see through that. So I'm going to focus on building a strong brand that will last that has power to it. So as I said earlier, your brand outside of you being what others think of you is your reputation and the perceptions that others have of you. Now, other people often have misperceptions of you, and all you can, that gets tough for your brand for a while, but a strong brand overcomes those limitations and the perceptions that others have of you. And if you do have a strong brand, that will eventually wear those misperceptions down. The most important thing, and then the brand needs to be built on things you can control. The most important of all of those things is your character, because if you have strong character and you're dependable and people can rely on you, whatever misconceptions people have of you will be overcome by that. So your character, your purpose, your values, your skill set, and your strengths and weaknesses, that's what your brand is built on. And part of the whole process of building a strong brand is learning your strengths and weaknesses and augmenting and showing your strengths and either improving on your weaknesses or omitting your weaknesses and surrounding yourself with people whose strengths overcome or nullify your weaknesses, for lack of a better term. So I want to go back for a minute and talk about the branding definition I gave earlier from Wikipedia, and that focuses on your professional life, but your brand is very strong as well when it comes to your social life and your dating life. That's part of your brand, and and strengthening your brand professionally, it goes over into all areas of your life. And so that's really why personal branding is so important, because it's not just your professional, it encompasses your whole life and it improves your whole life. And as you consciously build your brand, what it's going to do is make you more confident and make you more focused. And ultimately, your brand, as you journey through life, will be based on your hopes, your dreams, and your passions. That's how you find your niche. And really, the brand is about finding your niche and being comfortable in your own skin, strengths, and weaknesses, and being able to portray those so others can see it. So your brand is your unwritten resume. What can a strong brand do for you? It can help you get the right job. It can help you attract the right people around you. It can help you, and it can also help you attract the right romantic partner. So branding is very powerful. That's why people are starting to focus on it a lot more. So let me tell you a quick story about branding. Right after my first album came out, I was having lunch with a friend from college, and we'd known each other for years. This is almost 30 years later, and this friend works in the radio industry, and so the album wasn't out yet. It was coming out in the next couple days, and he was sharing with me, showing me data and stuff from radio and what's getting played and that. And then he said, well, I haven't heard your music yet, but you do need to work on your branding. Your social media presence isn't all that strong. And it kind of clicked at that moment, because there was a voice inside my head that said, he's right, my social media presence isn't strong. And, he's right, my brand is not that strong. But I kind of intuitively knew that social media was only a tool for branding, and I did need to work on my brand. Now, interestingly enough, my first album came out after my first two novels. So my novels were 2015 and 2017, and my album came out in 2018. And I was thinking branding somewhat because I called my first album Book One. So I was already linking, trying to at least link the music side of my brand with the writing side of my brand. And I do write science fiction and fantasy, so I also have a song on my first album called Dispatches from Dystopia that is sci-fi in nature. So I was already thinking branding, on that first album, but it wasn't really a full fleshed out plan as to how I was going to brand. On my second album, the 317, I was a lot more cognizant of my brand. The 317, that is the area code for Indianapolis. And so on that album, I did a lot more of things that I was already doing in my life and bringing it into my music. When I was in graduate school at Purdue University, I was an instructor and I was also a TA. I was an instructor in African American Studies and really enjoyed that. And enjoying the mentoring process with young folks, and still enjoy that. We have an intern program at the House of Representatives during session, and always enjoy the mentoring of interns. And so that mentoring aspect, I'm in my mid 50s, the lessons I've learned through life, I put a lot of that into my second album, and that stuff I'm doing naturally, and that's really how you brand. You don't try to take things, pie in the sky things. You do what you're doing now, and things that you care about and that you're passionate about, and you make that part of your brand. So your brand is authentically rooted in to where you are now. Now I have a lot of plans through my art where I want to be in 5 to 10 years, and I'll foreshadow that a little, but until that starts fully revealing itself and taking root, I'm not going to run ahead of myself in that brand. I mean, my brand is strong enough with what I'm doing now and who I am, where I can brand, in the moment, and brand it off of who I am. One more thing about my personal brand. So when I decided to do my music, I took the stage name, for lack of a better word, Exodus. And part of that was Okafor is not the easiest name to pronounce, and it looks like O'Keefer. My brother actually played football in the NFL for 10 years, and he decided to make it easy on people and pronounce it O'Keefer. But actually, the proper pronunciation is Okafor, is Nigerian from the Igbo tribe. So I wanted to honor the ancestors and keep the proper pronunciation. I mean, I have 3 brothers and sisters, and I think we all take a different approach to the pronunciation, and that's fine. But I've decided to honor the original, and it gets a little difficult. So one of the things I decided to do was Exodus, Exodus without the E, so Xodus. And so that was interesting because my books originally were just my name, Peter Okafor. So I went back, could not change the covers for the physical copies, but for the digital copies. So now I'm Peter Exodus Okafor, and that's kind of how I, on this podcast. But I made the decision to use both of my names. First of all, because I still share that with my 3 siblings and love them, so I don't want to separate myself from them that way. And also, I mean, very few people are blessed to have an African last name in this country, even though on the face of it, for a lot of people, it doesn't seem like Okafor's African, but it is. So I decided to kind of take the Donald Glover approach, and Donald kind of has 2 different personas. His musical persona is Childish Gambino, and as an actor, he's Donald Glover. So probably against a lot of advice of many, I've decided to kind of connect and merge these 2 different brands of Peter Okafor and Exodus. And that's, what I decided to do. I'm fine with it. And, these 2 different identities. And so, yeah. So where do we go from here for the the podcast. So in doing research for podcast, the cardinal rule is to keep putting out consistent content. And that's a little difficult for me because I work at the Indiana House of Representatives. We're about to go into session from January to March, and we work over 40 hours a week often during that time. On even years and odd years, it's even longer. So we go from early January to late April. So it's hard to do that plus music and get a consistent product, whether it's weekly or bi-weekly. So what I'm going to do is do seasons. So I'm going to try to get my first season done and then put it out all at once, and down the road do season 2 into season 3. And really, again, branding is about doing stuff that you're passionate about, and I'm passionate about music. So this year, or this season, this first season, the focus more on the building blocks, but in season 2 and season 3, the best branders ever, and they've started branding years ago, even, started in the 50s, were musicians, because they just got it, and some are naturals, and some of it was done by the music labels, and people are familiar with musicians, and oftentimes, whether it's the music or their stories, people are familiar with that. So after this first season 2 and 3, I'm going to focus on musicians. I'm going to sprinkle in some athletes and, other things, other folks, business leaders, throw a little bit of, maybe characters in there from whether it's James Bond. I love my comic books, so DC and Marvel, I'm going to drop some of that in every once in a while as well, just to keep it interesting and to talk about things I am passionate about. So just to give you a little idea of kind of what I'm looking at doing the rest of this season 1, again, this is the introduction. The difference between marketing and branding, I kind of touched on it when talking about the Wikipedia definition. Branding before social media, because there is the perception out there that branding is mainly your actions on social media, and that's not necessarily true. I mean, as I said earlier, social media is a tool, but it's not your brand. But it's an important tool, and you have to be very careful about how you and what your content on social media. Also, being notorious in branding. I mean, people think being controversial will get you attention, and that's the pathway to a good brand. It helps, but it can also be a deterrent. And finding what's unique, I call it embracing your weirdness. That'll be another podcast, because really that's what sets you apart from others. And it's about getting comfortable with yourself, because a lot of people spend their life hiding their weirdness and things that make them unique. And that's really your gift and your tool. And that's really, what your brand should be about. And I'm also going to actually do a podcast on social media and branding, because social media is important. Then I'm going to focus on again passions about branding and about things so I'll do a podcast for writers, a podcast for visual artists, and a podcast for musicians. Then I know there's some people like, well, I'm young, I just got out of college, I don't really have a brand. Well, your brand, you do have a brand, and you're building your brand, and your brand is your journey. So I'm gonna have a podcast focus on that. And then on the end season 1 with Branding Gone Bad, and these are famous folks who built brands and then kind of had things go sideways because who they are and their brand weren't totally synced up. And so we will focus on that. And so that's what you can look forward to. And going back again for a minute to season 2 and 3 of the podcast, where I will focus on individual musical acts. If that's an interest and you kind of want to run ahead, there's already a couple podcasts out there that do a good job of that. I'll start with Elvis and Johnny Cash and some of those folks, and the Beatles and Motown and James Brown, that kind of stuff. And I'll go to the late 90s. Nikki and Moose, they have a podcast. They're on the podcast platforms. They're also on YouTube. I find more of their better stuff on YouTube, but they do the early 2000s pretty good. My stuff will, as I said, will end in the late 90s. So they have a good take on Beyonce and Jay-Z and a couple of other artists when it comes to branding. And then if you're interested in current artists or artists in the last 10 years, Brandman Sean has some really good branding stuff on YouTube. So we all do the same thing. We all have different approaches, but their approach works, those two channels work very good with mine, and it'll kind of give you kind of an idea. It's so easy, it's easier with musical acts to do the branding because they've been doing it for a while and they're good at it. So I would recommend, if you want to run ahead, to look at those two. So now I'm going to take a couple minutes to promote my art because that is my brand, and it's kind of hard. I can bore you with a bunch of lists and concepts, or I can talk about what I do and how I built my brand through my art. So as I said, I did my 2 novels now and 1 novella. My 2015 is my first published. I self-published. So Salvation Road is a novella, and it's set in Suffragette City. And this is I took up writing. I wrote maybe 10 years before this, seriously. And it takes longer to write science fiction and fantasy because of the world building, and you have to be a little more seasoned in your writing and basically in life to really do it well. But this is people passed on in this kind of, a little bit like purgatory, or kind of where people go to work out problems from their life on Earth. And so it's a little like a pocket dimension, and in this world, songs have magical abilities, and you can offer super natural gifts to people. And so so the characters will have a name, and then they might have a song title associated with that. But it's healing. There's a lot of healing that goes on, and they interact with the different characters in Suffragette City, which, by the way, is a song by David Bowie. So my 2 novels, the first one is What Burns Below. The second is Journey Through the Earth. This is set in the Centrelix universe, and there's multiple Earths. There's 360 Earths. Half of them are science-based, half are magic-based. There's alternative Earths, so some of these Earths will be very different. Others will be familiar but different. And so Centrelix is basically a legislative body that tries to manage what's going on, and all these different. You can just imagine all the things going on our Earth, and there's 359 others. So they have teams of warriors and healers that go out and try to alter history in a good way, but in secret, undercover, so to speak. So it's a little bit, if you're Stargate SG-1, there's a little bit of that aspect to it. There's also a lot of politics and intrigue, so there's a Game of Thrones aspect to it as well. So again, these works are only on Amazon. Amazon is the only platform that will give you tools to actually promote your work. And Amazon only lets you have access to their tools if you are only exclusive on Amazon. So there are other platforms for books, but none of those other platforms offer you tools to promote your work. And Amazon's kind of greedy, so if you go on Amazon and all the other platforms, you can't use Amazon's tools. So kind of stuck with Amazon for that reason. As I said earlier, I've started doing music in 2018. So my first album is Book 1. The second album is the 317 Volume 1. The third album is Cyberfunk 2020, and in January of 2022, I will release Eve's Call. So that'll be my next album. So that's kind of what's going on. As I said, I think I mentioned this, I don't know, but I walked away from music for about 15 years for a variety of reasons, and we'll on later episodes I'll get into it more. But it ended up being a good thing because some of the skills that I've learned in writing, I'm able to transfer over to my music. So anyway, that's the plug. But it is part of my brand and it's part of the teaching. So I guess now I'm going to end, and one of the things I'm going to end by, and I'm going to do on these podcasts, is dropping my songs in. This one song I'm going to drop here is particularly pertinent because in writing they always tell you in fiction, to show, not tell. So I spent, most of the podcast telling, so I'm going to do some showing. And this song is called Game Recognizes Game. It's off the 317 Volume 1 album. And, this is about how I take my teaching and my mentoring aspects and bring them into music. But it's also about lifting up fellow artists and giving them a platform, using my platform to help others and linking my brand with other people's brands. And that's very important in life. And again, there'll be a theme through the coming episodes. So here we go, and hope you enjoyed this episode, and there's more to come. Hey, X here. Let's talk about success for a minute. The keys to success are integrity, always learning, practice, repetition, hard work, persistence, self-discipline, believing in yourself, having positive thoughts, focus, setting realistic, attainable goals, not being afraid to fail, managing your self-fear and doubts, blocking out the haters, adapting to your environment, developing good habits, and a ruthless commitment to excellence. Now that we have that out of the way, let's talk numero uno, surrounding yourself with good people. Step 1, find good mentors. A good mentor will have the following traits. Integrity. People are drawn to them. People trust them. You can trust them. They invest time, energy, and resources into others, often with no tangible benefit for themselves. People value their feedback. They know how to give candid, objective feedback in a diplomatic way. They are teachers. They love to invest in others. They understand that you will make mistakes. They know that important learning comes by making mistakes. Avoid gaslight kings and gaslight queens. They are manipulators. Use and abuse is what they do. They surround themselves with people to build themselves up. They do not invest in others. They are all about me, myself, and I. invest in your peers. There are others who want the same thing you want. They are in the same predicament as you. Collaborate with those you vibe with. Everyone is not your enemy. They can teach you something. You can pass your wisdom on to them. If you invest in them, they'll invest in you. At different points in life, they may race ahead of you for a while, or you may race ahead of them. One of you will have opportunities for others. Teamwork makes the dream work. Invest now and reap the rewards later. When it's your time to bring others into a project, you'll know and trust them. You'll know their strengths and weaknesses. Step 3. Implement your plan, work hard, be persistent, and watch your blessings flow. With that said, let me do an honor roll for my artistic peers here in Indianapolis, Indiana. These people have helped and inspired me, so shout-outs are in order. First, my fellow authors. Yes, I write science fiction and fantasy. You can find my books on Amazon under the name Peter O'Coffer. That is Okeafor. So much love to Maurice Broaddus, Jerry Gordon, R.J. Sullivan, E. Chris Garrison, John F. Allen, S.A. McClure, J.W. Tromner, Matt Barron, Steve Craig, and Maurice McKiernan. I also have to give a shout out to Matt Forbick in Wisconsin. Now on to my art friends. Much love to these painters. They are amazing. They inspire me. Sarah Cote, Justin Binning, Portland Blade, and S. McKee. That is S as in E-S-S-E. Finally, to my fellow musicians. Shadowcat, you and the Night Sons have been doing up good music for years. Keep doing your thing. I also need to give love to the Mud Kids, Blackberry Jam, and Toy Factory. Finally, my man Kerry Goodspeed is on SoundCloud. Check him out.
it up. Fucking it up.